something I truly believe. The older we get, the more we realize success isn't really about how much we have in our hands. It's about how much we can manage inside ourselves. Have you ever felt that way? When we're younger, we often think success means a fancy house, a nice car, expensive watches trips to Bali, or having a few million in the bank. I used to think that too, until one day I had all those things and still felt empty, not because I didn't appreciate them, but because I realized what I was chasing was the appearance, not the essence. One of my former clients, a marketing director at a big tech company, once told me during a session, I have a house, I have a title, I make seven figures, but it feels like I'm living someone else's life. I don't control my time. I don't control my emotions. I run every day, but I don't know who I'm running for. And I asked him if one day you lost all of that, what would be left? He went quiet for a long time, then softly said, maybe just a tired person who doesn't know who he is. You know what? I've worked with hundreds of successful people in the US, entrepreneurs, artists, investors, and there's one thing I consistently see in those who are truly wealthy on the inside. They don't define success by what they own. They define it by how much control they have over their lives. Control over their time, control over their emotions, control over their thinking, control over their responses instead of reacting on autopilot. Psychologists call this the internal locus of control, meaning your center of power is inside you. People with high internal control don't let the outside world define their worth. They're not easily shaken by opinions or market ups and downs. They have an inner backbone, and that's what creates real stability. I remember there was a time in my life when I owned 3 luxury cars, but couldn't even spare 3 hours a day for myself. I flew from city to city, spoke in front of thousands, but still felt anxious whenever I looked in the mirror. Why? Because I hadn't truly mastered my own mind. I was still chasing the spotlight, the expectations, the need to always look successful. It wasn't until I stopped, turned off my phone, walked away from everything, and asked myself if no one saw me anymore. If no one applauded me, would I still know how to love myself? Have you ever asked yourself that? If today no one praised you, if you had no title, no achievements to show off, would you still believe you deserve to live a free and meaningful life? If your answer is, I'm not sure, I don't blame you. I've been there. So many people better than me have been there too. But here's the thing, self-mastery isn't some mystical, unreachable thing. It starts with the smallest choices, like not checking your phone the second you wake up, like saying no to a plan just because you're scared of disappointing someone, like choosing a healthy meal instead of falling back into old habits. Success isn't about speed anymore. It's about depth. It's about being able to pause in the middle of the crowd and still know who you are. It's the ability to sit with the silence in your head and not be pulled into the noise around you. A close friend once told me I only knew I was truly free when I stopped being controlled by temporary emotions. So if lately you've been craving quiet more than chaos, if you've started reorganizing your space, your schedule, your relationships, not to prove anything but to own them again, if you've begun valuing inner control more than controlling others, then you're stepping into a whole different level of success, the kind no one can take away from you, the kind that doesn't need applause to feel worthy, the kind where you know exactly what you're living for. And if you're just at the beginning, don't worry. All you need is to choose again. One small action at a time, one inner decision at a time, and you'll realize self-mastery is the most sustainable form of wealth you'll ever own. And then something kind of magical happens when you start gaining control over your inner world. Your emotions stop running the show and you start guiding them. You're no longer a victim of anger, anxiety, or insecurity. You begin to notice them. You understand them. And then you learn to respond with wisdom instead of reacting on impulse. I get it. There were probably times you thought I'm too emotional. Or you asked yourself, why do I get hurt so easily? Or worse, you beat yourself up over snapping in a moment of anger, saying something harsh, or making a rushed decision you regret. But you know what? Emotions aren't something you need to get rid of. They're like your inner GPS. They're early warning signals. They're signs that you're alive, that you care, that something still matters to you. What we need isn't to avoid emotions, it's to learn how to move through them with awareness. One time I sat with a man 48 years old, super successful, running a company with over 200 employees. And he said to me, I can close $1 million deal without flinching. But the moment my daughter says, Dad, you never really listen to me, I lose it. I get angry, I say things I don't mean, and she ends up crying. I looked at him, a man who led hundreds of people, made huge decisions every day, and I knew he was now learning a deeper kind of leadership, emotional leadership. You see, the difference between reacting and responding comes down to one thing: the pause. A reaction is instinct. Someone says something hurtful and you fire back. It's fast, raw, unfiltered. A response is intentional. You pause for 3 seconds. You notice what you're feeling, and then you choose to respond in a way that aligns with your values. That's when you refuse to let your anger write the script. That's when you take a deep breath and say, I understand why I feel hurt, but I'm not going to let that feeling destroy something I truly want to protect. Responding is a skill, a sign of real maturity. When you're no longer swept away by your emotions, you begin to steer them. I used to teach my close students emotions don't need to be controlled, they just need to be guided with wisdom. Because you can't stop the waves from coming, but you can learn to surf them without being pulled under. Ever felt like you're just reacting on autopilot? Someone says one wrong word and you're instantly mad. A message is late a few hours and you feel abandoned. A tough conversation comes up and you go straight into defense mode. That's not your fault. That's your nervous system kicking into survival mode. But eventually, you realize if you want to live a deeper, freer, more awake life, you have to pause, breathe, and choose again. Emotional intelligence isn't about not feeling. It's about feeling clearly and not letting those feelings wreck what matters most. I once asked a young executive, do you want to be right or do you want to keep this relationship? Because sometimes the price of being right is disconnection. When you guide your emotions with wisdom, you stop trying to win every argument. Instead, you focus on winning in the long run by staying true to the person you want to become. If lately you've learned to hold space and listen instead of reacting, if you've paused to breathe instead of blurting out something you'd regret, if you've started recognizing your emotions and choosing a more thoughtful response, then you're already on the right path. You're moving from someone who's easily affected to someone who leads from within. You're building true self-mastery, the kind of success that's invisible on the outside, but deeply felt by anyone who stands near you. Because at the end of the day, the way you handle your emotions is the way you're handling your life. When you stop letting emotions choose for you, you start designing yourself. You respond from belief, from values, from the future you want to live. And you know what? That's not just theory. That's the exact path I'm walking with you. Every day, every choice, every breath. When you start navigating your emotions with wisdom, you stop living on autopilot and you start living with intention. And then something big shifts. You stop spending time like someone who's just getting by. You start investing time like someone who's building their future. The rich don't have more hours than you, they just use theirs differently. Everyone gets 24 hours a day, but when you're stuck in an old mindset, you tend to use time to avoid emotions, kill boredom, fill inner emptiness with quick distractions. You open your phone not because you have a purpose, but because you feel empty. You scroll through TikTok not to learn, but because you don't want to face your own stuckness. And then you start to wake up. You realize time isn't just something that drifts by. It's the raw material of who you're becoming. You stop spending time. You start investing it. From getting through the day to building the life, you start asking deeper questions before you act. What will this give me a year from now? Is this moving me closer to my goal or just numbing me from the guilt of not starting? Am I spending time or planting a seed that'll grow into something valuable? Just like smart people don't spend money for short-term feelings, awake. People don't spend time just to avoid discomfort. You begin to see clearly: 1 hour reading, Irashi profit 30 minutes learning a skill, Irashi profit 15 minutes journaling, reflecting, or realigning. Rusher also profit. Time doesn't disappear, it transforms into results. Here's a tough truth. Doing nothing doesn't always mean you're resting. Sometimes you're just slipping backward. And procrastination? It's using up your time without giving anything back. But when you adopt the mindset of an investor, you start treating time like a portfolio. You allocate it like a real asset, some for personal growth, some for real rest to recharge, not to escape, some for meaningful connection, and the rest for building the breakthroughs you dream of. I once worked with a 28-year-old client. She told me I feel super busy every day, but when the weekend comes, nothing's really changed. So we audited her week. Turned out 14 hours were spent just scrolling on her phone while feeling drained. Not real entertainment, not real rest, just avoiding the guilt of not starting something meaningful. I didn't tell her to cut everything out. I simply asked, if you invested just 20% of that time into reading one deep book, would your life look different a year from now? She nodded and she started. 6 months later, her income had doubled. Not because she did more, but because she used her time with more intention. You go from asking, what do I feel like doing today, to what am I building today? Start your morning with 20 minutes of learning instead of drowning in the news. Use 15 focused minutes to solve a problem instead of complaining for 2 hours. Spend 1 hour creating a long-term plan instead of 3 hours feeling guilty about wasting yesterday. And when you do that consistently, you'll look up one day and realize you're building a life, not just reacting to one. Freedom doesn't come from having more time. It comes from using time better. You don't need more time to live meaningfully. You just need to stop dropping your time into things that don't matter. If you've started scheduling time for yourself, if you're learning to prioritize what's important over what feels urgent, if you're choosing to build each day with 1% progress, then congratulations. You're no longer living by default. You're living with design. And that design, it's what turns time into wealth, reputation, health purpose, and real freedom. When you start investing your time with intention, you begin to see something crystal clear. Growth doesn't come from random bursts of effort. It comes from alignment when your thoughts, your words, and your actions start moving in the same direction, and then something quiet but powerful begins to shift. You stop saying, I'll try, and you start saying, I'm becoming. I'll try is the voice of hesitation. I'm becoming is the voice of someone who's already decided. When you say I'll try, you've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. You're already leaving the back door open, a way to back out in case it doesn't work, a way to avoid the pain of possible failure. But when you say I'm becoming someone who's disciplined, I'm becoming someone who influences others, I'm becoming someone who leads themselves first. That's when you start confirming the identity you're building every day. You begin to realize no one wakes up and suddenly is their best self. They become that person through every small decision, through every early morning when they don't hit snooze, through every conversation they don't walk away from halfway, through every time they say, I'll keep my word and actually do it. You don't become strong just because you want to. You become strong because you build it. A becoming mindset is the beginning of inner power, and it changes how you show up. You don't have to wait until you're successful to live like someone who is. You don't have to wait until you have 1,000 followers to speak like someone who influences. You don't have to wait for recognition to start respecting yourself. You live as if you already have it inside you. Because truth is, you do. You're just reconnecting with it one steady decision at a time. I once worked with a 35-year-old woman, a single mom just starting her business. She told me, I don't know if I can do this, but I'll try. And I looked at her and said, don't try, become. Every day, act like a successful woman, even if it's just in the way you write an email, talk to a client, or treat yourself. 3 months later, she messaged me, I haven't hit every goal yet, but I'm not the same person anymore. I'm becoming the woman I used to be afraid of, and now I'm proud of her. When you stop trying and start becoming, you live with identity, not confusion. You no longer need people to believe in you, because you believe in you first. You take action even before the results show up. You stay disciplined even when no one's watching. You keep your word even when no one's keeping score. Because deep down you know every action today is a brick I'm laying for the person I'm becoming. I'll try. Usually comes with, if it doesn't work, I'll quit. But I'm becoming comes with, no matter how long it takes, I'm in. That's commitment. That's the power of someone who doesn't wait for permission to start. They give themselves permission. They don't try, they live like they're already on the path. So if right now you're saying I'm becoming someone calmer, someone more grounded, someone more honest, more intentional, more real, then I want you to know you're doing it right. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be consistent. Because people don't try to become, they choose to live as if they already are. And that choice, that changes everything. You're no longer passive. You're showing up like this life is waiting for you to step into the lead role. No more half-hearted steps, no more confusion, no more waiting to be validated. Once you start saying, I'm becoming, you stop needing the easy path. What you need is the right path, the worthwhile one. Because now you understand ease was never the goal. Worthiness is where you're headed. Most people chase comfort. People with vision chase growth. You no longer ask, is this easy? You start asking, is this worth dedicating my life to? You stop avoiding challenges. You start facing them as a necessary part of the journey, because now you know nothing truly valuable ever comes without resistance. Maybe in the past you hoped everything would go smoothly, no bumps, no setbacks. But now you realize rainy days help the roots grow deep. Pressure turns coal into diamonds. Falling and rising again, that's where real growth happens. You're no longer afraid of hard, you're afraid of living without meaning. You know now it's not about who gets it easy. It's about who stays honest, steady, and committed to the end. Sure, you could pick the smoother road, but you choose the one that forges you into someone worthy of your vision. I once asked a young man, who do you want to become? He said, I want to be someone who makes an impact. I want to change my life. I want to take care of my mom. And I asked him, so how much difficulty are you willing to face to become the person who deserves that outcome? He was silent for a while. Then he said, all my life, I've been looking for the fastest way. Now, I just want the strongest way. Even if it takes longer, I want the one that lasts. People with vision don't avoid the hard road, they build themselves strong enough to walk it. That's what you are doing. You're not demanding life to go easy on you. You're making yourself stronger to meet life where it is. You've stopped searching for quick success hacks. Now you're searching for honesty with yourself, integrity with the process, a deep commitment to the value you bring. You no longer ask, when do I get to rest? You ask, who am I doing this for, and what mission is bigger than me? You don't need life to be easier, you just need a steadier heart. You don't need things to come faster. You need them to come at the right time when you're strong enough to hold on to them. You don't need to win today. You need to become the kind of person who's still winning 10 years from now. You don't need shortcuts, you need the real path. And because you've stopped chasing easy, you're starting to attract the kind of challenges that match your potential. Not to break you, but to wake you up. So if right now you're walking a rough road, if you're doing the hard thing but the right thing, if you're choosing what's worthy instead of what's easy, congratulations. You're not just moving toward your dream, you're becoming the kind of person even you will look back and admire. And that's what really matters. After you stop looking for the easy road, after you choose what's worthy over what's comfortable, something else starts to shift quietly but permanently. You no longer need someone to push you. You become the one who keeps going on your own. You stop living off inspiration and start being the inspiration. People who need motivation? Wait, but people who are motivation create momentum. You realize external motivation is like a rainstorm, refreshing, but it passes. But internal drive, that's a deep underground spring, quiet, steady, unshakable. There was a time when you used to look for motivational videos, reminder quotes, someone to pull you back up, but now you're the one who says to yourself, get up. We've got work to do. I'm not done yet. I'm becoming. You become the most reliable friend to yourself. You're no longer run by your mood. You don't wait for approval to take action. You don't wait for inspiration to write. You write and inspiration shows up. You don't wait for applause to move forward. You move because you made a promise to yourself. When you are the fire, you're not afraid of it going out because you carry it within you. You don't wait to feel ready to begin. You start and energy is created in motion. That's the difference between those who build foundations and those who chase fleeting excitement. I once worked with a man in his late 30s. He used to rely on the outside world to keep him going. He told me I only do well when someone's pushing me. I need a coach, a deadline, someone watching. But then he started turning inward. He discovered why he needed to change. And slowly, he became the leader of his own life. He told me I don't act out of fear of being late anymore. I act because I have a responsibility to the person I'm becoming. The most inspiring people aren't always the ones who speak the best. They're the ones who live the best. And you, with your consistency, your quiet integrity, your invisible discipline, you're becoming a living torch. Even if you don't say fancy things, even if you don't have thousands of followers, people see you and they feel something shift. If she can do it, maybe I can too. If he's still going, maybe it's not too late for me. You're living a life that carries weight, a life that ripples outward. You don't need to be loud. You just need to be clear. You don't need to shout your worth. You just need to walk in it. Your very presence, your quiet daily perseverance is the biggest message you'll ever send to the world. I stopped waiting for someone to lift me up. I became the one who stood up. I stopped searching for light. I became the one who lit the flame. Hannah, the motivation you now carry is the byproduct of the vision you've decided to live for. You don't push people with pressure. You move them with the calm energy of someone who's been through the dark and made it out. You don't preach change. You embody it. So if you're still showing up when no one's cheering, if you're still taking steps even when no one's watching, if you're the one your friends think of when they need to get back on track, then you are the source of motivation. No title needed, no spotlight necessary, just you living in alignment with the mission inside you. When you become your own source of motivation, something powerful begins to shift. You stop acting on fleeting emotions. You start choosing based on the identity of who you're becoming. Most people act on feelings. Grounded people act on identity. You begin to understand you're not always going to feel motivated. You're not always going to wake up energized. Not every morning will come with that fire in your chest, but you still show up. Not because you feel like it today, but because I'm someone who keeps their word. I'm someone who builds. I'm becoming someone others and I can trust. You stop acting to satisfy the moment. You start acting in loyalty to your future. You look at a piece of cake and you no longer ask, do I want this? You ask, what would the person I'm becoming choose? You hover over the Netflix button and instead of asking, do I feel like watching something, you ask, do I actually have time for this? Or am I trading something more important? That's what real maturity looks like when you stop living to please your feelings and start living to lead yourself. You stop making decisions in emotional fog and start taking action with clear vision. You start choosing discipline even when no one's watching. You start staying consistent even when no one's cheering. You start forgiving even when you don't feel like forgiving. Because you know I don't do what's right because I feel good. I do what's right because I'm becoming someone with strength and depth. You no longer ask, is this easy? You ask, is this aligned with the person I'm building? You don't choose comfort for today. You choose stability for tomorrow. You see that future version of you, independent, influential, free, trusted, peaceful, and then you adjust today's behavior to match that vision. You stop being a victim of emotion. You become the architect of behavior. And because you understand emotions come and go, but repeated behaviors become character, and character shapes your destiny. I've seen incredibly talented people, but their lives are chaotic. Not because they lack skills, but because they let temporary emotions dictate long-term action. A bit of sadness, they quit. A bit of disappointment, they walk away. A little fear, they freeze. And later they look back with regret. I wish I'd been more consistent. I wish I'd acted on my vision, not my mood. But you're doing it differently. You're learning to say, I feel bored, but I'll write anyway. I feel lazy, but I'm still training. I feel tired, but I'll keep going because I committed. You're no longer dragged around by emotion. You're the one steering your emotions with your values. Emotions are waves. Values are the sail. Your boat stays steady not because the sea is calm, but because the sail is strong. You act like you already are the person you're becoming, and little by little, day by day, you catch up to your future self. So if today you're feeling tired, overwhelmed, or unsure, but you're still doing the right thing, still staying present through the emotion, still choosing what's hard but necessary, then you're not living from the present, you're living from your future. And that's how you shorten the distance between who you are now and who you're meant to become. I want you to pause for a few seconds and think about someone in your life, someone that every time you see them, you feel smaller, not small in the humble kind of way, but small in your dreams, small in your confidence, small in the light you carry inside. One of my clients, a young founder from San Francisco, once told me during a coaching session, "I don't get it. The harder I try, the more lost I feel." And then it hit me. I spend most of my time explaining myself to people who'll never understand my vision. Have you ever felt like that? Like every time you try to be real, try to do something different, someone mocks you, questions you, or worse, tries to pull you back to the old version of you, the one you've been working so hard to outgrow. I used to hold on to relationships like that just because of old times, just because I didn't want to hurt anyone, just because I thought I should be kind. But you know what? Being kind to others while being cruel to yourself, that's not kindness. That's misdirected sacrifice. At what point did we start settling for smallness just so people don't say we've changed? At what point did we forget a very simple truth? If you hang around ink, you'll get stained. But if you stay near fire, you'll shine. It's an old saying, but it's never gone out of style. You don't have to cut people off. You don't have to get revenge. You just quietly walk away, but firmly. Walk away from spaces where you have to shrink to fit. Walk away from conversations where you leave feeling like you have to heal your energy afterward. In psychology, there's something called emotional contagion, meaning the energy of the people you're around can literally affect your nervous system, your hormones, and your behavior. If you're always around anxious, judgmental, negative people, you'll slowly stop trusting your intuition. If you're around people who settle, who always take the easy route, you'll start thinking that quitting is normal. I had an old friend, we were close for years, but as I grew, I realized we were no longer aligned. I wanted to move forward. She wanted to stay the same. I talked about vision. She said, be realistic. Stop dreaming. One time I asked her, do you think if we stay too close, we'll hold each other back? She just smiled, said nothing. And I knew we needed distance, not out of hate, but out of respect, for two people walking different paths. Not everyone is meant to walk with you to the finish line. That's not failure. That's life filtering what no longer fits. You know you're growing when you start choosing relationships that nourish, not drain. When you're okay with staying silent instead of forcing yourself into fake fun. When you sit alone and don't feel lonely because you'd rather be in truth than in a comfort that's built on pretending. Someone who truly loves you won't fear your growth. They'll ask, what do you need to go even further? Remember this, you're not here to please the crowd. You're here to stay loyal to the light inside you. And that light, it only grows when you're in the right environment, in spaces with fresh air, with people who look at you and see potential, not weirdness, with people who listen and give you belief, not doubt. One day you'll realize that loneliness you feel right now is actually a gift that protects you until you find the people who were always meant to walk beside you. Your real tribe, the ones who don't dim your light but help you turn it all the way up. I once worked with a client, a young CEO running a tech startup that was raising a Series B round. He walked into my coaching room looking completely drained, but he couldn't figure out why. So I asked, what do your days look like? He said, I work nonstop, from 6 a.m. till almost midnight, but I still feel like I'm swimming hard and going nowhere. I looked him in the eyes and said something that sounds simple, but changes everything. You don't lack time. You're leaking attention. You know, when I was younger, I used to think the biggest asset in life was money. Then I thought it was relationships, maybe reputation. But the older I got, the more I realized your most valuable asset is your attention. Because whatever you give your attention to, you grow it. Whether it's a dream or a fear, a powerful vision or a meaningless habit. And if you really pay attention, you'll notice we live in a world that's constantly fighting for your attention. Every ping, every hey just checking in, every mindless scroll you don't even remember starting, and every second of that chips away at your energy, thins it out, weakens your inner clarity. One of my clients, a fashion designer, once told me I thought I was busy. But really, I was just being pulled in too many directions. Being busy isn't the problem. Being distracted is. Because where you place your attention, that's where your life energy flows. And energy, it's limited. You can't refill it with just coffee or a nap. You need to rebuild your inner alignment. There's a study from Stanford University that found the more people multitask, the more their productivity drops, and the worse they get at making important decisions. That's why highly successful people in any field have one powerful habit in common. They protect their attention the same way they protect their bank accounts. I want you to imagine this. Your attention is like a strong beam of light. If you scatter it across a dozen things, it barely lights up anything. But if you concentrate it on one spot, it burns. That's the power of focus. And focus is the father of all breakthroughs, all reinventions, all greatness. So you start saying no more often. No to pointless conversations. No to the nonstop notifications crashing into your brain every 5 minutes. No to things that make you busy, but empty. Not because you're arrogant, but because you're loyal to your mission. One of my friends said something that stuck with me. I'm not the smartest. I'm just the least distracted. And guess what? That one thing protecting his attention helped him surpass people way more talented than he was. The more focused you are, the harder it is for the world to ignore you. You're evolving from someone who reacts to someone who chooses, from someone who gets pulled around to someone who directs their mind with purpose. That's what real growth looks like. That's what real freedom feels like. Because once you learn how to protect your attention and your energy, you hold the key to unlocking any door to success you set your sights on. Have you ever felt like you were being swept away by a current, but you're not even sure where it started? News, social media trends. What's hot right now, they all scream, hurry up, keep up, don't fall behind. So, you start running, not really knowing where you're going, just afraid of being left behind. I've been there. I remember a season in my career when I kept jumping from one idea to another. One moment it was podcasting, then crypto investing, then chasing TikTok trends, YouTube shorts, you name it. Not because I really wanted those things, but because everyone else was doing it. And I thought, maybe I need to do this too, just to be seen. But over time, I realized I was slowly losing myself in all that noise. One of my clients, a young content creator, once told me I'm creating stuff, but I don't even know who I'm talking to because honestly, I'm not even sure who I am anymore. Have you ever felt like that, creating something just because others are doing it? Choosing a path because someone else found success there? Chasing opportunities but feeling empty the whole way through? That's when I learned something really important. Not everything that's trending is meant for you, and maybe you're not falling behind. You're going deeper. Let me paint you a picture. You can plant seeds on a dozen different plots of land, but if you only dig a little into each and move on, you'll never see anything bloom. From a behavioral science standpoint, Harvard research shows the more we're constantly stimulated by change, the less focused creativity and clarity we actually have. Constant direction switching fragments your mind. And when the mind is fragmented, your life energy leaks out with it. So when you start choosing depth over width, value over noise, you stop blending in. You become the kind of person who knows what they're building and why. I remember working with a client, a startup founder. He said, I used to think doing more would get me there faster. But all I did was split myself into so many pieces, I forgot which ones were truly mine. So he took a step back. From 7 product lines down to 1, from 5 platforms down to 1 focused channel, from 15 different advisors down to 1 mentor, and he committed. 2 years later, his results were 10x better, and his mind was 10x more peaceful. And deep down, I think you felt that truth too. That quiet inner voice saying, pause, go deep, build something real, be someone irreplaceable, not just visible. You're living in a world obsessed with surface level everything, but your soul is hungry for depth. That's why you're exhausted from trying to do it all the way the world told you to. You don't need to go viral today. You need to make an impact that lasts tomorrow. When you start choosing depth, you don't post out of fear of losing engagement. You write because there's something in your heart that needs to be said. You don't choose a career because it makes people rich fast. You choose one that you could walk for a lifetime and not grow tired. You choose to do less, but with more truth. To speak less, but with more weight. to stay grounded rather than just stand out. And you know what? It's in that quiet that the world starts to hear you. When you stop trying to do something to be liked, the people who truly need you start finding you. Remember, depth never goes out of style, and real value always attracts effortlessly. You don't have to chase trends, because when you go deep enough, you become the trend. I've met so many people smart, kind, ambitious, but the moment the word money comes up, you can see something shift in their eyes. A slight frown, a deep sigh, a sudden tension in their face. Some are afraid there's not enough. Some are afraid of losing it. Some have been hurt because of money, and some have never really understood what money actually is. I remember a woman once told me during a therapy session, I feel like a failure because I don't make as much as my friends do. And I asked her, okay, if someone wired $2 million into your account tomorrow, would you suddenly feel smarter, better, more worthy? She paused and then smiled. Because deep down, she knew money doesn't define your worth. It simply reflects a portion of the value you've been able to create. You see, when you start maturing on your personal growth journey, money stops being something that triggers fear or obsession. You stop clinging to it like a life raft, and you stop worshiping it as a measure of your identity. You begin to realize money is a result, not a resume. In financial psychology, they call this separating self-worth from net worth. People with a mature mindset don't measure themselves by the number in their bank account. They measure themselves by their ability to create value, solve problems, and serve others with something real. And then money shows up, not because you're chasing it, but because you're attracting it by being useful. I've lost everything before, not once, twice. I know what it's like to watch your account dip near zero while the bills keep knocking on your door. But I also remember, even though my heart was racing, I didn't fall apart. Because I knew if my value is still here in my mind, in my hands, and how I treat people, then money is just something I can rebuild. And next time I'll build it better. Ask yourself this: when was the last time I felt anxious about money? Then ask yourself, am I afraid of not having enough money, or am I afraid I'm not enough to create it? Because here's the truth. Money is just paper, unless you tie it to your ability to create something useful. Truly wealthy people don't panic when money gets tight. They know how to create value, and value always finds its way back to them in one form or another. Not just money. That's when you stop being a slave to money and start leading it with calm confidence. And eventually you'll come to this realization. When you separate money from your identity, you become truly free. You no longer have to prove anything. You don't need to be better than anyone. You just need to stay honest with the value within you and let that do its work. I don't know what kind of pain you've been through. Maybe it was a loss, a financial collapse, a friend who betrayed you, or a dream that felt so close and then slipped away. We all have that day, the day when something inside us felt like it broke in two, and all we wanted was to disappear from the world for a little while. One of my clients, a man in his 30s who had failed 3 startups, he came to me and said just one sentence: "I'm tired of people telling me to learn from failure. I've learned enough." I paused, and then I asked him, "Okay, but have you turned any of that pain into something useful yet?" This time he didn't speak, but his silence had a new kind of clarity. You know the difference between someone who stays stuck in their wounds and someone who actually grows from them? It's not about whether or not they fall down. It's about whether they know how to extract the lesson from the pain. Psychologists call this resilient cognition, the ability to reinterpret adversity not as a punishment, but as a personal training program tailored by life itself. Someone who's still fragile asks, "Why is this happening to me?" But someone who's growing asks, "What is this trying to teach me? I remember failing hard at 27. I lost money. I lost credibility. I had to look my team in the eye and apologize for letting them believe in a dream I couldn't deliver. I was sleeping in a tiny rented room listening to the sound of a cheap fan, all night asking myself, am I still someone of value? But that night I sat up and wrote one line in my journal. If I can still write something honest today, I still have a path to walk." And I kept walking. The next day, and the day after that. I don't know what kind of pain you're carrying right now, but if you're here reading or listening to this, you haven't given up. You've realized pain isn't meant to be stored. It's meant to be forged into strength. You no longer tell your story to gain sympathy. You tell it to light the way for someone else, and that is inner power. Power that can't be bought, only earned through fire. You've started to look failure in the face and call it by its truest name, the silent teacher. And when you can turn your pain into fuel, your failure into wisdom, your wounds into a sense of responsibility, you don't just become more successful, you become more trustworthy, more memorable, more human. None of us escape struggle, but the moment you choose to learn from your pain instead of shutting down your heart, you take a giant step toward a deeper kind of wealth, the kind no one can ever take away from you. I remember once during a coaching session with a 32-year-old woman, talented, passionate, but nearly every decision in her life started with the question, do you think people will approve? So I asked her something simple. If tomorrow no one clapped for you, no one criticized you, would you still live the same way? She went quiet. And I knew that silence was the start of a shift. We grow up in a world where being approved seems like proof of our worth, a diploma, a like, a compliment, someone agreeing with you even if they don't really understand you. And so many people smart, full of potential, hold themselves back just because they didn't get a nod from the crowd. But then somewhere along the path of growing up, you realize your true value isn't in the applause. It's in what you're willing to do even when no one's watching. There's a term in behavioral psychology called internal locus of control. It's what describes people who no longer wait for permission from the world because they've already granted it to themselves through consistent action. I've been there. I've written posts and deleted them because I thought no one's going to care. I've said no to opportunities just because friends said, that doesn't sound right. I lived like my life was a document waiting for someone else to approve, until I finally asked myself who actually understands this journey I'm on better than I do. And from that day forward, I started signing off on my own value through my choices, not applause. Have you ever held back from doing something just because no one else said, go for it? Have you ever waited for approval before allowing yourself to begin? If so, I want you to hear this. No one else is living your life. So no one else has the right to authorize your worth. Every time you wake up early to read, to learn, to build, you're certifying yourself. Every time you choose to keep going when quitting seems easier, you're giving yourself your own degree. And every time you stick to your principles, even in silence, even in solitude, you're building a kind of authority that doesn't need the crowd to validate it. This world will always have people who don't understand you, and there will be seasons where no one praises you for a whole year of effort. But if you keep going, if you keep planting seeds, if you keep showing up like the quiet builder laying one brick at a time, you won't need permission anymore because you'll be the living proof of your own worth. There was a time in my life when I lived pretty loud. Every morning I'd wake up, grab my phone, scroll through headlines, check social media all on autopilot. And the questions I asked myself were usually things like, what's everyone talking about, instead of what's actually going on inside me? And then I realized I knew a lot, but I understood very little. We live in an age where knowledge falls like rain, but real understanding, it's drying up because we're consuming information, not digesting it. We're learning to have answers, not to ask better questions. I had a client, a brilliant tech engineer, once tell me, I can explain a complex AI system, but I can't explain why I feel so empty every night. He knew how the world worked, but he didn't know how he worked, and that's what was draining him. I'm not sharing this to judge anyone. I'm sharing it in case you feel that way too, so you'll know maybe it's time to go deeper. Not to know more, but to understand better. Not to ask questions just to sound smart, but to ask questions that actually matter. Not to read fast, but to read in a way that changes you. Neuroscience tells us the brain doesn't retain what it skims. It retains what it emotionally connects to and reflects on. Meaning, if you're just listening to, know you'll forget. But if you listen to live to see yourself more clearly, those words will sink into your thinking, your decisions, your daily life. I once reread a book I had first picked up at 23. Then I read it again at 31. Same book, same page, but the feeling completely different. Because I was a different person. The first time I read to know, the second time I read to understand and to live. I wasn't reading to find the answers. I was reading to dig a well inside myself. And that's when real transformation began. You don't need to read 10 books a month to live deeply. You just need one, but read it with an open heart and a present mind. Ask yourself, why do I believe this? What value in me is being challenged right now? If I understood this more deeply, how would I live differently? Because you can't build a meaningful life on a shallow foundation of knowledge. When you choose to live deeper, you become harder to shake. You stop being led by the noise outside and start tapping into the stillness inside a place most people never dare to go. In that place, that quiet, deep inner space becomes your source of wisdom, of calm, and of true wealth. I used to be really good at talking. Talking about plans, talking about dreams, talking about what I was going to do someday. I thought that saying it out loud meant I was serious. But the truth is, the more I talked, the less I actually did. And worse, I got caught in the illusion of doing something when really I was just standing at the edge of action. There was a moment in my life when I looked back and realized if everything I'd ever said actually happened, I'd be in a totally different place. That's when I started to go quiet. Not because I gave up, but because I finally understood results speak louder than declarations. In behavioral psychology, there's something called the social reality effect. When you talk about your goals too early, your brain releases dopamine, and it tricks you into feeling like you've accomplished something. Even though you haven't taken a single real step, talking is easy. Doing, that's hard. And doing with strategy, that's rare. So I started practicing silence. I didn't need to announce I'm changing. Instead, I let every small choice, every early morning, every focused hour, every task completed, be the living proof of what I was building. I didn't need others to see me because I saw myself in the mirror every day. And it wasn't just about doing more. It was about doing with intention. Because let's be honest, not everyone who works hard gets where they want to go. The ones who really succeed, they know what to do, when to do it, and why it matters. I once coached a young entrepreneur. He worked 14 hours a day, barely took breaks. But after 6 months, he came back with the same question. Why am I still stuck? The issue wasn't his effort. It was that he'd been climbing a tall ladder, leaned up against the wrong wall. Without strategy, hard work just burns you out faster. So ask yourself, are you just busy or are you moving closer to what matters? Are you acting out of fear or from a clear direction? Because when you start doing less, but with more clarity, everything begins to shift. That's when you no longer need to shout your goals. You live them one decision at a time. You don't need to promise anything because your consistency is the promise. You walk quietly but firmly. You speak less but with more depth. You don't chase applause because you've started listening to your own inner voice. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, you're not the same person anymore. You're becoming quietly but powerfully. And that is one of the clearest signs you're living like someone who's truly wealthy from within. Wealthy because you have depth. Wealthy because you have direction. Wealthy because you don't need to prove you're building. Keep going. Don't stop. Because real results don't come from noise. They come from quiet, steady alignment. And one day when you look back, you'll smile and say, I lived it right.